Hello, and welcome to the Dead Man Walking Podcast. I'm your host, Repeatedly Dead Fred, author of the medical trauma memoir, The Summer I Died 20 Times, which is what actually happened to me, and that's how I got the name Repeatedly Dead Fred. Today, with me in our mental health, and intermittent fasting section, we are talking with Scott Fulton, who has too many hats for me to talk about on my own. But basically, he's a longevity expert and has his fingers in a whole bunch of different pies that I'm hoping he's going to share a few of them with us, even though some people say pies aren't the best thing for us to be eating these days. So, Scott, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Fun to be here.
Thank you. So I guess my first question is, when I first found you on LinkedIn, you had posted a couple of articles on the benefits of coffee, which is a hotly contested topic in the intermittent fasting world. Do we do coffee? Do we don't do coffee? But then I dug a little deeper and I find out you're actually a mechanical engineer by training. So,
Well, isn't everybody?
so how does that one make that leap from being a mechanical engineer to I guess into the longevity and biohacking world?
Sure. So we kind of say in the world of engineering, mechanical engineers are jack of all trade and master of none. So that would apply. I think in my case would be appropriate. Probably a lot of it had to do with my first job that got hired out of school was into research, doing materials research for a multinational country or company, and that got me into the research mindset and how do you do science and how do you extract and learn information, both in terms of the scientific methods, but also where do you get your information. So I don't read the headlines in newspapers. I read journal articles, and so if that's where you come from, there's lots of common ground there into medicine. And in reality, I think the analytical method is really what goes into medical science or whatever we're studying. That's always been an interest. I had a number of friends I played hockey with when I lived in Canada for many years.
Go Canada!
We're medical doctors, and so I often looked at different ways that I might get into medicine in some other ways, using some engineering methods with prostheses and things. And anyway, one thing led to another, and found myself after a fairly long in and out of corporate, saying, what do I want to do with the next and possibly last career move? What has life prepared me for? And I realized that the space of aging was really where I thought the big opportunity was, where I had something to contribute. And that started honestly with aging in place and what can you do for people. And that they asked me if I would start teaching at the university. And then I started to reach out to my existing and new doctor friends, and they were all quite happy to get involved and try to help. And that just drew me into realizing, well, taking care of the home is only one aspect of longevity. It fits in the environment pillar of the 5 pillars of longevity. So I just continued on. My wife is a organic chemist, so she had some interest as well. And so between the two of us, we're constantly researching and trying to keep up on where things are going and what are the ways we can take care of ourselves and help take care of others.
I think there's a emerging generation of doctors now that are starting to look outside the traditional foundational stuff that they've been taught in schools. And they're saying there has to be something better out there for us to work with our patients. And those are probably the doctors that you're in contact with.
There's a real trend, I think. If we take just kind of the allopathic approach to medicine, it's there for kind of understanding what's its primary purpose is response to acute medical events. That's what it's set up to do, and that's really where it specializes. As soon as we get into anything that's more chronic disease in particular, the system was never designed to do that, and it shows itself now as chronic. We've dealt with so many of those acute conditions, and we're pretty good at it. but even then it takes typically about 20 years to get something that, at the bench scale that we know works and is validated, to get a clinical trial, to get that through, to get it into a primary care physician's hands. That's on average about 20 years. It can be 30 years. It might be 10 in the best case. Maybe technology and those methods will flow through quicker. But in terms of, the system doesn't reward doctors for being out on the leading edge. It discourages it. It's the herd mentality. We want everybody marching in the same direction. Otherwise, it's, to them, they fear chaos, not being able to control anything. So yeah, there's lots of doctors who have left kind of the system saying, I want to be able to do more for my patients. And I've got, I can't wait and sit on the bench for another 10 years for everybody to catch up.
Well, thankfully, I'm Toronto based and I'm in the home of Dr. Jason Fung, who I think you may know of. And so when I ended up in the hospital in the cardiac ward, all the doctors in that particular cardiac ward were huge fans of intermittent fasting. And it's a go-to procedure, I guess, or practice for many of them. So that's a big step, because that can really reverse a lot of conditions, and I know it has for me. So.
Yeah, we can talk about diet in the context of, on one sense, it's a fuel, right? It's in terms of we need fuel for our mitochondria, the energy plants within each cell in our body. But when we talk about how we can think also in a mechanistic way to say how we eat matters too, not just what we eat. And so that's where the fasting, I think, has come in. And we have medical supervised fasting that can go on for 30 days routinely. And it's what type of reset you need. And for some people, fasting is really a powerful tool more than any other. And of course, there's no medicine associated with it, right? The medicine is not eating.
So in your travels, and now you're teaching a lot about longevity, do you have something that you've learned that's just, so out of the box that you're even surprised that it's become a technique or a tool for people to use?
I think one of the the engineering mind in me, the science-based, and I'm very pragmatic in all these areas. Probably the biggest surprise for me is meditation. What I knew about meditation, goes back to what the Beatles were doing, and heading off to India. That's one that clearly is a stronger tool than I think society has yet to embrace. We know scientifically we can measure the length of our telomeres, which is one of the biomarkers for rate of aging. Nothing matches telomere recovery in terms of being able to preserve our telomeres, which are the tips of our chromosomes, than meditation. And that's pretty powerful. And then translates really into essentially stress management. And so that was kind of the other would be to say, there are all the things we talk about that you can do for health and longevity. But if you don't manage stress, you could argue you're pretty much wasting your time, because stress is just constantly there. And so the tools to manage stress and recognize we're all going to get stressed. How do we deal with that as a tool? And that's where meditation comes in. But more broadly is how do we manage stress? If we can get our arms around that one, that's probably one of the biggest leaps we can make forward.
So can we talk about telomeres for a little bit? So just maybe a bit of a broader definition. That's the endpoints of our chromosomes. And if they shorten and they start to decay, we essentially become unraveled. And that accelerates our aging. Is that
right?
Simplistic?
So as a Canadian, you'd appreciate this example I use in class.
Okay.
Right. So if you think about our chromosomes are all wrapped around histones. Imagine that's a ball of string. all wound up nice and tight. You buy it, you bring it home from the store, it's all wound up nice and tight. And you could leave it sitting on the shelf, but it's not going to be of any use, right? We need to be using it somehow. So we're going to use it for things. And so if we use it through normal use, we all know that it starts to get a little, it starts to become a little bit looser over time. So imagine now if our lifestyle is more like, well, let's use it to play road hockey instead of a tennis ball or something. We use that ball of string to play road hockey. And you can imagine how quickly it's going to start to come apart. And once it starts to get loosened, now suddenly all the string gets exposed, not just the scuffing on the outside, because initially you would find that all the markings were just on the outside. But now as it gets loosened, we have much more surface area. It means that our genes are much more exposed to the chemistry in our body. And so there's much more, if you will, kind of switching of genes on and off in a much more active rate than it would be based on how we're kind of designed to age slowly over time. And then taking it forward, once our telomeres will shorten every time cells divide, right? Different types of cells divide at different rates in our over the course of a lifetime. So they will typically shorten. And each time they divide, they'll get a little bit shorter. And so we would expect to measure the telomeres in a 90-year-old to be significantly shorter than in a 10-year-old. And that's normal. But when we talk about accelerating the aging factor, if your telomeres now are a 90-year-old's length, but you're only 65, a good indication that your rate of aging is quite a bit quicker, and that'll show up in many ways, both outwardly and inwardly as well.
So we can use these sort of like they use the rings in trees to see the aging process. So can you tell by looking at the telomeres what might have happened to somebody that has caused this advanced aging?
We don't have good science to try to go back in history. What we're doing when we measure telomeres is we're measuring clusters of lengths, because if you think about, there are cells that are relatively new in our body and some that are older. So what we're measuring is, on average, how is that average shifting as a cluster? But we don't really know what caused it necessarily. And part of it is there is a genetic foundation to say that even if we did the exact same thing, you and I did the exact same thing, we are going to age at a different rate anyway, just because of our genetic starting points will be somewhat different.
Interesting. So I've been very involved in intermittent fasting for the last 5-6 years, and it essentially saved my life, along with some pacemaker technology and stuff of that. And hotly contested in the intermittent fasting world is coffee. And you just posted an article about coffee and the great benefits of it. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. It's coffee and wine. So coffee, wine, and chocolate always generate a lot of buzz, right?
In more ways than one.
Partly because they're things that we, that lots of us enjoyed taking, and food is one of the ways to celebrate. We want to eat food that we really enjoy. So there have been a number of studies now, both on coffee and tea. And so what they're looking at is to try to understand what are the benefits and what are the negative aspects of them. And if we just look at coffee for a minute, the upside of coffee is really associated with the flavonoids or the phytonutrients that come with it, because it's a bean. And so we understand that those are important for cellular health. But we also know that too much of a good thing is generally a problem. And so that can clearly be a problem. Once we get beyond about, I think it's 7 cups, everybody agrees that's too much coffee, which to me is a whole lot of coffee. But but I think it's in the 2 to 4 cups a day is about where they say is the optimal level. And if we think, just kind of stepping back, essentially everything about biology is about trying to find the sweet spot or the balance point. Lots of them have this U-shaped curve or a J curve that says some is better than none, but too much, not so good. And so coffee for sure has benefits in the right dose. And it's the number one source of flavonoids in North American diets. They get more from more flavonoids from coffee than they do from fruit and vegetables. So that's a comment on the diet. Not that coffee is that powerful. Coffee certainly has a good supply, but it still falls second to tea. So we look at things like some green tea and some of the old teas are quite high in flavonoids, but they aren't nearly as popular in the diet. So if we say it on a population basis, we don't see as much health benefits from drinking tea, just because there aren't that many people drinking it. But so it's better if you don't eat any vegetables or any fruits, then for sure drink coffee.
Can people just like munch on some coffee beans if they're not into the drinking coffee? Would there be any benefit to that, do you think?
Well, I discovered I was doing work. So this was in my engineering days. I was doing work for the Los Angeles transit system. And in those days, I did a lot of work on trains. I literally had my own train. So in Canada, I for a while had my own via LRC whole train when I was doing testing for them back around, I don't know, probably 15 years ago. Anyway, so I discovered the chocolate coated beans when I was doing work in Long Beach. I had a train that was going from LA, downtown LA to Long Beach. Every other day I was running a train. And so you're going to get the benefits. But if you don't like coffee, chewing on a coffee bean to me is probably, I find it hard to imagine anybody doing that. But perhaps they do.
Every year or so, I get convinced to try coffee, and I love the smell. Not so keen on the taste, but I get like unbelievable jitters. I'm guessing that's the caffeine, because I don't do caffeine at all anymore. So I wish I could drink it.
It's like a lot of things that if you were to take it, and so you have a hypersensitivity to it, and so if you started with a very small dose and you slowly increased dose over a period of weeks, you would probably find that you would be able to settle into drinking a cup and not kind of feel like you were jittery for hours. Because generally the body is, in lots of ways, the body has buffering systems built into it to manage that. So if it's not used to seeing caffeine and suddenly it sees it, it says, code red, we got some new chemical in here. We better put some fires out. So it's you would have to want to do that. There's no, I would always suggest you probably do better eating healthy food rather than thinking coffee is the way to optimal health.
So if you were to give a summary of one of the courses you teach, what would you say is the foundational thing that you're trying to get across to your students, or maybe even the families you consult for through your business?
Yeah, so the challenge is, I think, is always a starting point, and I think where everybody wants to skip to the solution. And that's where I kind of say, just hang on, because the solution depends on who we're talking to, right? It's the old meets people where they are. Well, when it comes to a lot of the aspects of health, what you do today and what your health history is has a big influence on what would be the appropriate way to go forward for you. And so that's why I work on education in terms of helping people simply, if they do nothing else but ask better questions, because they now have some information to understand their own health a little bit better and now start to solve these things on their own and not rely on others. That's the ultimate, right? No one's going to be there to choose what bite of what food to take. We've got to figure this stuff out for ourselves. So it's really, most of my education centers around the information all of us ideally would like to know. Wish we'd learn in school if it was available. Wish there was some way to educate rather than the sensational things we tend to see in the media. So it's really a balance between mind, environment, diet, activity, and community. So mind, environment, diet, activity, and community. Understanding with each of those. So mind is things like stress, our attitudes towards life will have a big influence on our attitudes towards others. Environment is both the external environment that we're living within. So if you lived in downtown Toronto versus on a lake up in Muskoka, for example, those are different environments that will have an influence on your daily health. Diet would be, what are the foods that we're eating? So that would be the quality of foods, the quantity of foods, and the timing of foods, which goes right to your intermittent fasting. Activities would be, what are the activities of daily living in terms of NEAT? So non-exercise activity, thermogenesis. So what activities are we burning, or calories we're burning through the course of a day? What does exercise look like to us? And then the last one being community, and that's really both the connections that we have with people, the support networks that are around us, that will allow us to operate. So everyone, if I put a questionnaire across those things, everyone is going to come up with, in this area I'm strong, in this area I'm kind of average, in this area I guess I'm falling behind. Once you start to get those informations, you can start to balance them out. And, and depending on the type of person you are, you may say, I want to go after the one that I'm the lowest. Well, there's probably a reason why you're low, is because maybe it's on the exercise, because you don't really like exercise. So let's start with something you do like. Maybe you're already really good at it, but ultimately health and longevity thrive based on balance, not on being probably today I see the biggest challenge there is people are so focused on their diet that they don't necessarily, they aren't seeing the benefits from it because they're so stressed over it. And they're trying to make up for it by not exercising or spending all their time on the internet versus time with people and community. So those are pretty common traps that we fall into, and so it's a way of objectively looking back and looking at yourself and saying, where do I fit in? And so now within that, I think out of those mind, environment, diet, activity, and community, I probably don't have enough friends in my life in terms of close friends. And maybe that's the place I should start. So what would be the things that I could do to start to generate that? So it really, the answer there is it depends on who you are and where you are in your life.
One of the things we've learned from the intermittent fasting world is that when people learn they don't have to count calories and log everything, and they're only eating one meal a day, it's just such a huge release of decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think people realize how much goes into reading labels and shopping and saying, yes, I can have this. No, I can't have that. And not just for me, but for my spouse and my kids or my parents or whoever's in the realm of people you're taking care of. It's just a huge consumer of our own energy.
Yeah, I've never been an advocate of calorie counting. It's because you immediately go into the, what am I sacrificing? What am I giving up? And so now we're into that tension. If there's one thing I try to counsel people on, if you're going to count one thing, count your fiber intake in a day. Fiber will do more for any diet and than probably almost anything else that we do. Again, depending on where most of us are. Most of us on average are in the 15 grams a day of fiber. We get up to 40 or even 60 grams a day of fiber. Fiber is what we call the great fixture. it makes up for all sorts of problems in our diet or shortcomings in just on how our body processes food. It's really what fuels the microbiome as well, in terms of the fibers that are dissolved. And it also protects the epithelial layers in our gut, which are incredibly vulnerable. We talk about leaky gut or intestinal permeability. Fiber is one of the best ways to address that, because we preserve the mucosa layer, which is really like, the kind of like in our nose and our mouth, right? That mucosa layer is really important. And you can imagine if you had no saliva in your mouth, or your nostrils were bone dry, that skin would immediately become very inflamed. And so it's the same inside your gut. You want to make sure you're doing things to preserve that mucosa layer.
If I was in the design business of human bodies, that mucosa layer in the gut, in the digestive tract, might be something I might want to reinforce and make it a lot less susceptible to the damage that it can inflict on us. And as someone who, I'm still overweight, but I was at one point 340 pounds, and I had body-wide inflammation, which I'm sure is from leaky gut and the sepsis that ran rampant through my body. I think I would want to maybe double up that layer and give me a little more protection.
Yeah, so that's actually, just if I can go there for a second, so we moved to Charlottesville, Virginia. We was living in Delaware before, and it was really around a doctor who had done some work around leaky gut, and really had come to understand what were the ways to keep those cells in terms of the gap junctions together, because they just choose to stick together. There's nothing holding them. They're there by choice. And so as soon as we release an enzyme, for example, that causes them to open up, it happens very easily. And so the communication between cells is really important. And so that was it's the only product, as people ask me about supplements and things, I said that if I had to do nothing else, it would be it's called ion gut support. And it really is, it supports the communication in those epithelial cells that line our gut. And that's my wife had 30 years of fibromyalgia, and so it's an autoimmune disease. Many of the autoimmune diseases go back to leaky gut. And so, rather than treat the symptom, go back to the core. And that's really, it starts with, I said, that's from a supplement standpoint. But again, supplement it with, on top of really healthy food. So I really recommend organic food. Again, my engineering days, I used to run, I was plant manager of a pesticide plant for a multinational company. And this is someone telling you, I would recommend that you eat organic. There are very good reasons for it. Organic is changing to regenerative agriculture. You'll see that transition happen over the next decade or so. And that's the other benefit, again, of adding lots of fiber, and generally plants foods. I'm not saying you need to swear off meat, but that's where lots of plants will help to reinforce the gut lining. So those would be in terms of the three things that they will fix a lot of disease issues that people are trying to deal with.
So is your wife fibromyalgia free now, or mostly free?
She, in terms of symptoms, she had it, to give you an idea, she had it so bad in her 20s, her brother had to brush her teeth for her. She couldn't even manage to lift a toothbrush. And she's eventually got moving, and a coach helped her to realize that once she got moving and got exercising, that was, in terms from a hormone balance, was helpful. And it started to recur when she was about 50. And then once she discovered, she tried, and the key with the supplement for her was that in about 3 days, she saw a big change. And what for her, and she's a PhD organic chemist, she's pretty smart. But what it was, the signal to her was, what I put in my mouth makes more difference than I realized. And so she quickly switched over to start to eat healthier. And so the last 10 years have really changed for her. And so from a symptom standpoint, no, she no longer deals with fibromyalgia. It's been a big change in her life.
So do you think that's mostly the fiber aspect of it, or the food in general, or no way to tell?
So that's why I say it's the three things. Well, sorry. And then the fourth one is you sleep better. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you get all these compounding effects. At the end of the day, I kind of argue it doesn't really matter which. We know that when you start to line up doing healthy habits, good things just naturally get easier to now pile on top of it. And so, it doesn't really matter whether the chicken or the egg came first. if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And it's interesting, but she couldn't tell you today, and she has spent probably as much research time on it as anyone. And she wouldn't be able to tell you which it was, because we don't have the tools to measure these things the way that we might like to.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we will one day.
Yeah, that's the day of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning coming into play, which I certainly see in medicine and personal or precision health. That's coming, and that's going to help you and I out a lot to figure out why is my body responding to something differently than yours is, perhaps, and what is it that I need that's unique that my doctor couldn't begin to understand in the 7-minute visit that I have with them once a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is definitely a flaw in the system.
Yeah, so it'll supplement that work very well. AI is going to have positive and negative impacts, like every other technology that comes along. But in terms of from a precision health standpoint, there's just it's pattern recognition far beyond what humans are able to resolve. So.
So I think it's going to be particularly helpful to guys like Tim Spector, if you're familiar with Tim and the
A
Zoe
little bit.
Project and stuff like that. Is there anything we haven't covered that you might want to get out there into the podcast world?
I think the one thing that I always find myself speaking to, and it's kind of timely right now. So we'll go back to our Canadian roots. Peter Attia's book just came out.
Oh, okay.
Outlive just came out about a week ago, and Peter and I have been kind of on similar paths in terms of starting out as engineers and went into medicine, but also more in philosophy around understanding. And we also both have athletic backgrounds. We're not buddies. I'm not suggesting that for a minute, but just of people doing the same sort of patterns. He's also 10 years younger than I am, so he's got some work to do to catch up. But is the role of exercise and really understanding what exercise is an activity, and it's one of those areas where I think it is the common weak link, and exercise really from a health standpoint is a couple of components. Is they recommend 150 minutes a week. Most people don't know what that 150 minutes a week is. It's not 150 minutes of walking around your neighborhood. There's some intensity associated with it. It's a modest number. So it's ideally that would be about 300 is really ideal if you can get there. That requires you to have probably a job that you're on your feet and moving all the time, but you've got opportunities to get your heart rate up. So you're not just walking, but you're walking up some hills with some pace. You're walking at a speed of about 4 miles an hour when you're out walking, which is faster than most will walk. The act of moving, again, has so many downstream benefits to it. And so it really starts with the habits of trying to keep movement as part of your life. And going to the gym, the weekend warrior thing we've known for years, that's not really the road to health. It's really what you do 7 days a week. Not working hard or exercising hard 7 days a week, but the act of moving multiple times through a day, continuously from one movement into the next. You're in a meeting, we get up and we'll get up in class and have a 5-minute break just to kind of get things moving, because our lymphatic system relies on movement to work, right? We don't have a pump, a heart that we have to move blood around. The lymphatic system requires movement for it to work. And so if we're just sitting there, it doesn't have the opportunity to to be able to move. And that's really what our immune system is relying on, is moving through the lymphatic system to be able to get where it needs to be as quickly as possible. It's answering the call, but if it doesn't have a ride to get there, we've disabled its ability to work for us. So that's probably the one is just, and that's that neat thing, is that non-exercise activity. The benefits there are pretty big. So, and the more we do it, the easier it gets. And we will need it in our later years. And it's not waiting to do it later. Not a plan. That's a plan to fail, guaranteed.
Absolutely. Well, Scott, this has been fantastic. I very much appreciate you coming on. If people want to find you and get some consulting or take one of your courses, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, you mentioned LinkedIn. I probably commit more of my kind of free time to education on LinkedIn. And that's the wealth span, which is part of that's built around a investment philosophy. So for the financial folks out there, that it's familiar language to them. I also have my education site is Longevity Advantage. And there's also, I have a podcast on YouTube that I parked for about a year while we got moved, and that's just going to start to get back up and going again with some medical experts that I bring on there occasionally. But that's probably the best. And Home Ideations is the parent company. And that's really where we kind of run a few things out of. So, and that's really goes back to where I started with really doing consulting for people at home. So that's homeideations.com. Yeah.
For those of you that are a little slower on the uptake. So thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for all of you that have tuned in. Thank you for tuning into the Dead Man Walking podcast. And please like, subscribe, share, visit Scott's social media and find out more about him. And maybe he can do something to help you get a little more longevity out of your life. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next episode. Bye-bye.